Hi everyone. Hi everyone, thanks so much for being here today. My name is Lillian and I'm a Food Literacy Project Fellow at the college. I'm a current sophomore studying psychology. And it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker today. Her name is Pilar Eguez Guevara, and she is from the Department of Kinesiology and Community Health at the University of Illinois at Urbana, Champaign. She's a... Sorry? Champaign. Sorry. Forgive my mispronunciation. She's a PhD in anthropology, and her research currently focuses on the relationships between nutrition, lifestyle factors, and chronic disease among aging populations in Latin America using statistical, historical, and ethnographic methods. She is research director and co-founder of Comidas Curriculan, an independent education project documenting food traditions and transformations in Ecuador through ethnography and film. Please welcome her today.
Okay. Can you hear me? I'm kind of like losing my voice, so bear with me. I just want to say I'm a cultural anthropologist and I'm from Ecuador. So some of the examples that I'll be offering are based on my field work in Ecuador and based on my research on food politics in Latin America, but I'll also offer perspectives into recent enthusiasm about this new therapy of fecal transplants and based on a study in Tanzania. So just overview. So the first part of the talk will be a discussion on the recent narrative on quinoa guilt, on media articles, and based on the growing interest and demand for this Andean product in the U.S. The second part of the talk is based on my own research finding on the decreasing consumption of coconut among people in the coast of Ecuador. And like I said, a final commentary on a study made by U.S. scientists about the microbiome, and I will explain what that is, and the experiments they conducted with fecal transplants among the Hadza people, which is a hunter-gatherer tribe in East Africa. And I will finally offer some solutions to some of the problems and that I will present throughout. So there's been a recent controversy and a lot of discussion about quinoa, and it's been on the news, and they've covered the high international demand for quinoa has driven the global prices up, and that has impacted locally people in Bolivia who have relied on food for many generations. So there's these media articles suggested we should feel guilty about buying quinoa and eating quinoa because in some way our choices are harming people in the Andes. And this relates to the broader discussion of food gentrification, which was started by especially African American writers here, and it was on Twitter in relation to traditions from the South being appropriated by elites, and it was taken. So this discussion pertains to. Or translates to the global phenomenon of the popularity of highly nutritious food like quinoa, right? So I wanted to clarify some misconceptions and give some background. So the rise in the prices of quinoa in the Andean countries affect different people in different ways. There's positive and not so positive outcomes of this high international demand. So definitely farmers have benefited from this greater international demand, and exports in Bolivia have actually they have increased for over 100% in the past decade or so. So the farmers that used to grow quinoa and they're now selling it for the export market are definitely selling more of it and are making a profit, right? And it's been also an incentive for other farmers to grow grow quinoa and take advantage of this greater demand. It's very much likely created more jobs for the people involved in this business, and as a consequence, and more importantly, in the sense of the values that it's this greater international attention has been able to impact in the local values, right? In the local value system, and so as a consequence of that, as one newspaper in Bolivia said, reported the local people and the peasants saying this used to be the food of the Indians and now it's the food of the rich people in the rich countries, right? So, and it was served at the wedding of the queen and queen's daughters in Spain. So that it must be something good. So the government it has brought a change in the local values in a way, and an attention of the elites and the local authorities, and the government has included in public school and prenatal programs in the city. And this actually explains how the consumption of quinoa locally has also increased. And it's actually, as is shown in this news article from a Bolivian newspaper, from the total production, 24% goes from internal consumption, right? And here comes, where is that internal consumption oriented? So this is where some of the not so positive outcomes of this come in. So there's this quinoa fast food phenomenon going on in the cities, right? So a lot of this increased consumption and demand of quinoa is driven by the industry, and the growing industries in the city, which have recognized the value of this product and have incorporated it in fast food products, right? And there's all kinds of, fast food quinoa products, and kind of like a rebranding of quinoa in the city under all kinds of modern philosophies like vegan and healthy and health foods. This idea of health food is a kind of novel, right, in Latin America. So these are the kind of forces that are driving the internal consumption of quinoa. But also the prices have gone up, and that's a reality. And this means that the people that, especially in the cities, have been affected by this price increase, right? Because they don't have the product nearby, so they have to purchase it, and the high price increases. But it's rather different in the countryside, where the quinoa actually grows, right, and the farmers actually have access to it, whether the price rises or not. But there's been recent ethnographic studies and journalistic reports reporting on whether it's true that quinoa consumption has also decreased in the countryside. And there's this, it's been documented that farmers sell their products to purchase less nutritious processed foods and packaged goods. And that peasants and farmers in the countryside actually prefer some of these foods, or use the income from the higher sales of their quinoa crop to purchase this less nutritious food. But this, like I said, like I mentioned before, is not a new phenomenon, because historically in the Andes, like I said, quinoa has been scorned by the elites, right? And it was, for 500 years been considered an inferior food, deemed as food of the Indians. So I can tell you an anecdote from my grandmother. She's about 100 right now, and she told me she remembers the time when she was younger, when quinoa was scorned as a food of the Indians. And I'm from Ecuador, and this is a very similar process in Ecuador. And ever since the 80s, when the doctors when I specifically a doctor in Ecuador started doing research about the nutritional qualities about quinoa, then he started promoting the idea that quinoa was actually a nutritious food, and it actually was taken up by the people in the cities, right? So also since the 1960s and 70s, there were development projects sponsored by the World Bank and the US agencies, which introduced foreign-made foods into peasant communities in the form of donations. And these donations were attached to poverty reduction and development. This was a push for development in the region that started in the 1950s. And these donations often include subsidized crops from the U.S., like wheat, soy, corn, and other products. And these donations are subject to a set of conditions on the part of the receiving country, which benefit large corporations and discourage the production of it in the local countries. And one example of that is Ecuador. Ecuador went from being a self-sustained producer of wheat to being an importer of wheat as a consequence of these programs. So the availability of these sometimes free and cheap food donations and the status that it gives people according to the prevailing value system in the countryside and in the city means that people switch from using their local foods to using processed foods. And also convenience is another factor, right? I mean, it's quinoa, the harvesting of it and the preparation of it and the cooking process, it's time consuming. So convenience is another factor that is driving people away from, in the countryside, away from their local foods, including quinoa. So this process of gentrification or global gentrification of quinoa is not recent, but rather a long process of transformation of social and cultural value of local and imported foods, which must be understood in the broader context of the history of colonial domination, urbanization, US imperialism, and the push for development. So the more recent global gentrification of quinoa that is tied to this recent quinoa boom that has happened in the past 10 or 20 years, the outcome of it is that it has benefited some people, that those who are mostly tied to the quinoa business, but have likely harmed others, particularly in the cities with lower incomes. However, this longer process of value change have fostered dependency. Dependency on foreign, less nutritious industrialized foods, and supported the expansion of US subsidized industry of these crops, specifically wheat, soy, corn, and packaged foods in Latin America and in the Andean countries in particular. And also, it's created a dependency of quinoa exports in this growing global market, which in the long term places Andean farmers in a vulnerable position in the face of emerging competitors of new quinoa varieties that are currently being experimented in Africa and the United States. And there's a fear that soon we'll hear about GMO quinoa, right? So these in the long term might be a problem for the farmers that currently depend on this market. So the next example that I want to share is my research on coconut consumption in the coast of Ecuador, and offers an example of a different kind of gentrification. This is where I work, the province of Esmeraldas, right here. It's in the border with Colombia in the coast of Ecuador, and it's a home to a majority of people of African descent who have had coconut as a staple in their diet, and coconut really characterizes the cuisine of this region. For example, people from Esmeraldas are, the cuisine is characteristic in their use of coconut with respect to the province of Manabí down south, which uses peanuts as a base for their food, right? So really, coconuts are, Esmeraldas is the place where most of the coconut production comes from, especially ripe coconuts. And I was conducting research there as part of my project of, documenting the transformations in diet with older people, gathering their memories about food and how their food habits have changed over their lifetime. And in particularly in this region, I noticed a major change was in the consumption of coconut. So the older men and women that I interviewed told me that 50 years ago when they were children, they remember eating coconut at least 3 times a day, in every meal pretty much. And every day, right? Because it was widely available and it was used to make a wide range of soups and also stews. And the coconut stews is a very, very characteristic dish of this region. So basically, it's made with it's a fresh pressed coconut milk. People, the moment before preparing the dish, they grate the coconut and they press the milk and they mix it with greens from the very fragrant. This is oregano and other greens, a different kind of cilantro and basil. And they use seafood and other meats. But 50 years ago they used a really wide range of wild rodents that they hunted in the nearby regions. So today people told me they're not eating nearly as much as coconut as they used to eat before. Maybe 2 or 3 times a week, or some of them went to the extreme of just eating it once a year. And that is pretty shocking, right? A pretty drastic change in this region, which is known for their rich cuisine and the rich culinary tradition using coconut. So, and this is another dish made with ripe plantains and cinnamon. And one of the characteristics of this transition is that people because of I will tell you why now, but they're using milk cheap pasteurized milk they buy at the store instead of the fresh pressed coconut milk. And the reason why is that coconuts has gotten expensive over the years. So from the year 2000, one coconut costed 30 cents, and 2015, people in the where coconut grow have to pay $2 for each, up to $2 for each coconut. So this means that it's really too expensive to eat it every day, and people are switching to pasteurized milk and simply avoiding eating coconut or coconut dishes. So what is driving the price rise? So again, the industry in the cities is buying all the coconuts from Esmeraldas, and to produce these healthy foods, right? Like granola specifically. One of the granola factories are one of the biggest, buyers of grated coconut from Esmeraldas, and also coconut water, and more recently, over the past 1 or 2 years, coconut oil. And it's it's been sold as a superfood in health stores and everything. So that's not all the reason for the price increase, because there's people like in Bolivia that they have coconuts in their backyard, they're growing them, and yet they're not eating them. So the other reason is their fear of fat. they're told by doctors that it's bad for them because it's high in fat. Coconut is 30% fat and it's 98% saturated, and so the whole saturated fat fear really strikes the culture of eating coconut, right? So this idea of the fear of fat, maybe some of you are familiar with this guy, Ansel Keys. He was one of the pioneers of the whole idea of saturated fat as being unhealthy and causing heart disease based on studies he conducted in the 1940s, and he demonstrated the association. Yes?
Who is that?
Ansel Keys. He's a doctor from the US, right? So he conducted these studies, and he was then, after a few years, appointed to the American Heart Association, and he really was influential in the dietary guidelines that prevail until today in the US, right? But over the past maybe 20 or less years, there's been studies that challenge the hypothesis that he promoted, that there was an association between eating saturated fat and mortality from heart disease. So today, especially in the alternative health world, is becoming mainstream. Saturated fat is not bad. These studies were wrong, and there's many studies that have demonstrated that's not the case, that this association is not accurate. So the problem with that is that, Batter is back, as Time magazine proclaimed last year, eat batter, and 10 or 20 years ago they told us not to, right? And then coconut has become a really trendy health superfood that cure all kinds of diseases, right? Especially in alternative health diets. But what that represented for other countries that actually grow coconuts, like I said, this idea was globalized. The idea that saturated fat is unhealthy, and it arrived in the and it was used to make the policies of countries in the global tropics and all over the world, but significantly for the case of coconut in the global tropics, where coconut have been grown and used for maybe thousands of years, right? So this is a chart based on FAO data about how the whole idea of saturated fat drove people away from traditional animal fats, and then vegetable oils, processed vegetable oils, and actually the industry, the vegetable oil industry in Ecuador is, the first one was established in the 1970s actually. So that is more or less the time when you see the first hike in vegetable oil. So people driving away from eating their traditional foods and buying this processed vegetable oil at the store. And that is what you see in Esmeraldas. People have everyone has oil and margarine in their kitchens, and they think coconut is bad for them. So, and it's actually a public health campaign. It's part of the public health campaign that has been promoted. This is a flyer that I got from a local hospital in Esmeraldas, where they specifically indicate avoid saturated fats from animals and from coconut. And he's actually a farmer, and one of the people that told me that he actually eats coconut. His favorite coconut dish is a shrimp coconut stew, and he eats it only once a year when it's the birthday of his son. And he has a plantation, and he grows the coconuts. And I asked him, and he said, "Well, the doctors say that coconut kills." The it's the obvious result of this is that the impacts of this globalization of misinformation that is actually produced in the centers of research, like the U.S., has a greater impacts on the countries that actually grow these foods, right? And the other very unfair outcome of this is that sometimes these foods actually are reintroduced in the countries with new labels, and actually, as in this case by this American entrepreneur who set up a coconut oil factory in the coast of Ecuador, and he was featured in the Smithsonian magazine as as a kind of savior. He's coming in to Ecuador to save people from their vegetable oil habits, their deadly habits, and he's saying, this is the Smithsonian. Ecuadorian kitchens and street food stalls reek of stale, burned oil, but one American man is striving to invent a new culinary tradition. So it looks like everyone knows that vegetable oils are not a tradition in Ecuador. They're an American invention that basically he's arriving in Ecuador like a discoverer, to find out what already existed. So some of the takeaways of these two studies, or two cases that I talked about, is that so that gentrification is not new, and it's tied to the workings of capitalism and cultural imperialism in this frame of world system where the free market facilitates the drain of valuable food resources from the peripheries to the global economic centers with big consumer bases and consumers with great purchasing power. And on the other end, junk food, technology, and lifestyle kind of trickle down from the first world to the global south. And at both ends, the problem relates to cultural values. I think the core, beyond the economics of it, are the cultural values. So in the people from Latin America embracing lifestyle and foods from the US under the quest of development, which blinds them to appreciate the wealth and value in their own local resources, knowledge, and traditions. And in the other end, the US development and the big industries' control of agriculture means that privileged consumers seek nutritious alternatives abroad, and which they can't find locally. And this consumerist and consumer-driven and kind of imperialist mentality that turns the world into a big health mall where consumers have the power to create markets to fulfill their particular aspirations or diets, right? So moving on to the next case that I want to talk about, I recently participated in this free online course on Coursera taught by faculty at the University of Colorado Boulder entitled The Microbiome. And the microbiome refers to the collective genes of the community of microbes or microbiota that populate an organism like the human body. So it's all the microbes that are in our gut, in our mouth, and in our skin, right? And in our surroundings also. So during the week 4 of this course, the faculty discussed topics related to microbes that are found in our gut, and some of the determinants related to diet and age and lifestyle, and how these microbes impact human health, and particularly its role in obesity and gastrointestinal diseases. So also during this week, the content of the course included interviews from experts on the topics filmed on site in Tanzania, in East Africa, and they were conducting a major project examining the gut microbiota of the Hadza people. And this group of scientists were collecting samples from their gut, skins, and mouths and environment so that they can study them as determinants of their health. So just as a quick background, the Hadza are an indigenous ethnic group in Tanzania, which is said to be one of the last hunter-gatherer groups in the world. They number less than 1,000, and they have drawn great attention in the scientific community because the infectious diseases, chronic diseases, and nutritional deficiencies are rare or unknown in this community. So basically their foraging lifestyle, diet, and diet that they follow today is very similar to that which was reported 100 years ago. So they allow for comparisons with people in the West and in the current moment. So several studies that have been conducted on this ethnic group have observed that the lifestyle, the diet, and the exposure to modern substances such as soaps, cleaning agents, antibiotics, which are absent among these people, have caused us in the West to lose beneficial bacteria in the skin, mouth, and gut, which scientists are finding may play a role in our higher risk of chronic diseases and weaker immune systems. Also, the different kinds and the great diversity of microbes found in a specific person is related to longer breastfeeding periods, lack of contact with domesticated animals, and a diet high in wild, mostly plant foods that are high in fiber, as well as wild game. And these are some of the reasons why these people have this kind of microbial diversity and the kind of microbes that you can find in their gut compared to what we have in the West, right? So also C-sections and the generalization of C-section means that the baby aren't able to get the microbial or the protective bacteria from their mothers through natural birth, right? Because they don't have a contact with the vaginal canal, and that is why you explain the absence of some of these microbes in the people in the West. So everything points at, or all this research points at, that it's the modern or urban Western lifestyle and environment and diet, as well as the therapies and the medications and the substances, why we in the West don't have the beneficial and protective microbes that others like the Hadza who don't live this lifestyle are able to enjoy today. So my perspective is that the Hadza people earned the unique microbes they have in their guts and bodies for living this lifestyle and inhabiting an environment that they have preserved by using centuries-old knowledge and expertise. So even more, the Hadza have resisted systematic attempts from Western agents, being missionaries, scientists, or state agents, to colonize and civilize them. So their microbiome constitutes their own unique form of capital that they have cultivated over centuries of knowledge preservation and resistance to Western influence and attempts of control. But unfortunately, the deeply colonialist and imperialist mentality that prevails in the medical and alternative health community in the US leads industry researchers and consumers alike to feel entitled to take whatever resources they want from around the world, even if those are found in the gut of a hunter-gatherer person in a remote area of East Africa. So the following is my response to the microbiome course video interviews with US scientists tied to the Human Food Project working in Tanzania among the Hadza. And I posted this on the course forum as an open letter to participants, Boulder faculty, and those involved in the food project, in the Human Food Project. So I said, I am wondering if anyone here has considered the ethical implications of the Human Food Project as per the interviews on site about the experiments with the Hadza in Tanzania. I found the way the Hadza are discussed in the videos very troubling. It doesn't seem right to talk about them as a dying culture and people whose precious microbes will soon be lost, and therefore it is somewhat of a moral obligation of Westerners to go in and take them before they are completely gone. As one of the interviewers said, quote, I think rich countries have the resources, the technology, the know-how, and the responsibility to help restoring and recovering the microbial diversity that we know is going to be lost, unquote. I asked, don't the Hadza have a voice? Don't they have an agency over their lives? Are they really going to die out or be irrevocably assimilated to Western lifestyle? Isn't the very presence and close contact of anthropologists with them and scientists with them doing exactly this, that is facilitating the assimilation and their loss of pristine ancestral microbiota? On a side note, one of the researchers commented in his blog, having brought the Hadza man to a public hospital to get tested, way to protect the Hadza ancestral microbes from the Western cleaning agents. So clearly the ones that need to get healthy are the scientists conducting the study and the people in the West, but not the Hadza. Does it matter to the researchers or us what the Hadza really need? I found even more troubling to suggest that taking the Hadza microbes is necessary for the good of the sick people in the West, but also for their own good. And I quote again from one of the interviewees and experts, quote, "We need to preserve the diversity that is going to be lost. These people have a lot to teach us, have a lot to give us, but it's not only for our own good, but for their own good, because it is an unstoppable process. All these hunter-gatherers are going to become integrated to the world lifestyle, which is dominantly Western, highly technological. So we don't want to lose that. We want to preserve that for them and also for us," unquote. I wonder who truly believes that these scientists are doing this for the good of the Hadza. It seems illogical that the researchers claim to be rescuing the Hadza's microbes, so when they finally assimilate to the Western culture, the microbes will be given back to them, perhaps in a pill or with a price tag. So it is truly also insulting to have the Hadza in the background image of one of the interview videos. These, the quote-unquote natives, are displayed as spots that get lost in the natural landscape, very much like 19th century representation of slaves in colonial plantations. Otherwise, the videos do sporadic shots of children or women digging the ground with sticks or making fire. We never hear their voices. Do we care if they can speak for themselves or what they actually want? It seems that these researchers are simply using the Hadza to pursue their own ends, even if theirs are the cure for cancer or a treatment for obesity, which are diseases predominantly affecting people in the developed and Western world. Right at this moment, the Ebola virus is killing thousands in the continent of Africa. However, the response of authorities and much of the society in the West is to think of ways to protect themselves rather to aid in stopping the epidemic from killing more Africans. Something seems to be very wrong about the ways in which health is sought in the West and First World today. It's very disappointing to see this unquestionably praised in this course. People should know that there's legislation in place to protect this kind of appropriations of knowledge, medicinal plants, and foods being used by indigenous for thousands of years. People in the West are taking biopiracy to a whole new level now by taking their microbes. These people have a voice and an agency. They are not dying out. So that was my post. But a few other course participants also posted their concerns over ethics on biopiracy and whether these communities would see any benefits or compensation from the use of their resources by a company for profit, as in the case of a patent. Do the Hadza have any kind of legal or political backing to ensure their interests are protected? But none of our concerns were addressed by the course faculty of the University of Colorado Boulder. But even more troubling to me were some of the statements made by the founder of the Human Food Project, Jeff Leach, which one of the experts featured in the course video. In his own blog, he discussed his experiment to administer himself a fecal transplant for a Hadza man while in Tanzania. He explained his motivations in a blog post dated from September of 2014. Quote, "The experiment of going Hadza via a fecal transplant was to see if I could catch or acquire their consortium of microbes to diet and lifestyle changes. Since I did not have the time to live among the Hadza for months on end, a time I felt would be necessary to make my gut look more Hadza-like, I thought something more radical was needed." So this statement to me is a great example of the convenience mentality of the medical and alternative health community in the West, in which people want the health of indigenous people without the trouble of living their lifestyle, contributing to their social reproduction and well-being, and even less so participating in their political struggles. The obvious takeaway from this is if you want the healthy gut microbes of the Hadza, then you should move to Tanzania. If you want to live healthy to age 100, then move to Okinawa and live with them for life and contribute to their society. Let's not be parasites that hoard on the earth's resources, appropriate indigenous knowledge, and then leaves. But more realistically, it seems obvious from the research about the Hadza is that what needs to happen is that we have to change our surroundings to make them more conducive to health. So, for example, rebuilding our environments to avoid living sedentary lifestyle, stopping the abusive use of cleaning agents and antibiotics, returning to birthing and childbearing practices of the not-so-distant past, longer breastfeeding and natural births, protecting our soil and eating foods that grow locally, which entail changing our own food system. So in response to the critiques that he got in his blog, Jeff Leach emphasized that he had not done this fecal transplant to get healthy because he wasn't sick, but rather to advance the science, and this in turn would serve the ends of the industry and consumers in the West. Quote, everyone in the Western world is wondering what gut microbes they should have and spend a lot of time taking probiotics and eating fermented foods, all for the microbes. The holy grail would be to determine what an optimal gut flora looks like. That is, what researchers and consumers are looking for in the West. Unquote. Finally, I found some of Leach's comments on his experiment problematic because of the way he refers to the Hadza as having a quote-unquote ancestral gut. His comments read as if he is on a sort of rescue mission to take back from the Hadza what he lost because of the imaginary relationship he creates with distant ancestors of the Paleolithic. He states things like, quote, if I was able to acquire and keep a portion of my donor's ancestral microbiota system, or it's exciting to think that we all once harbored this diversity, microbial species, in the ancestral Hadza, but have lost it through our Western diet and lifestyle. He reiterates that the Hadza are a unique window into the past, or, quote, one of the better populations in the world for trying to understand what our ancestral microbes may have once looked like, unquote. So in his imagination, the Hadza embody a prehistoric relative of his that he seeks to connect with by means of a quick microbial transplant, or a gut-to-gut connection with the distant Paleolithic past. Many people in the so-called ancestral health movement, also known as the Paleo movement, promote this fantasy relationship with remote ancestors, which often leads them to promote a worldview that denies the realities in which we live in, or an ideology that selectively denies the modern world, as a recent Guardian article described it. This ideology blinds people like Jeff Leach to realize their true social position and rather conflicted political and ethical relationship as a privileged first world white man with respect to his microbial donor, an indigenous black man in a rural area in East Africa, and also deny his role in reproducing an unfair global system that allows him disproportionate power and privilege to benefit and exploit the resources of historically and marginalized peoples in the global peripheries without facing any consequence. So summing up, the attempts by the researchers over the Human Food Project to colonize the bodies and resources of the Hadza have been disguised as their desire to appropriate some sort of ancestral past through a microbial transplant for what they view as a living prehistoric people in the present. And it's rather sad that and unfortunate that this kind of imperialistic attitudes and exploitative practices prevail and go unquestioned in the health-conscious community, and also shows the extent to which the pursuit of health is viewed as a selfish and individualistic goal in which ethics and social responsibility over the means and unfair outcomes of that person seem to be irrelevant. So to end, I've offered some problems and quandaries that we as conscious consumers in a globalized world confront in our pursuit of health. And this includes food gentrification, biocolonialism, ethics, cultural appropriation, and food guilt. So I wanted to offer some solutions or quick tips to address some of these. So first, study anthropology. Learning about other cultures different to us makes us better people, less intolerant and more respectful for cultural differences. And really, studying anthropology help us be less ethnocentric and more aware of our social privilege and position vis-a-vis other people. But, you know, and also fighting these mindless cultural appropriations of traditional foods, diets, and resources from other countries and other people, including microbes, that can lead to racist, sexist, and neo-colonialist attitudes and practices in the absence of true cultural appreciation. So the key is how to transform appropriation into appreciation. Learning about the history, traditions of the people living in the places where the foods are grown, eaten, and the conditions in which they are produced. This will transform the way that we relate to these foods and the people from a less automatic experience, as in only thinking of the individual health gain to be obtained from consuming the product, versus a more mindful experience that looks beyond the food and into the people and is more conducive to cultural appreciation, tolerance, respect, and perhaps peace. So also, you know, if you truly care for making change, the answer is not to feel guilty, but getting involved. And I'm sure a lot of you are already involved in supporting local food systems and ways to change the system. Another solution, dig into your own roots, look into your own traditions, pick an ancestor that you can realistically really relate to, and where you can draw real geographical and material connections. This will avoid, you know, the kind of politics of appropriation of other traditions and possible ethical problems, as in the case I presented of the Hadza microbes, and leads us to discover good practices, cures, and even superfoods in our own traditions that merit doing some research on our own ancestry. Finally, manage your food emotions, teach the guilt, and bring out anger. So I wanted to cite Raf Patel's really suggestive quote. There is a bigger delusion, a very American one, that we can create a better world by shopping. The solution is not to feel guilty about our food choices. What we need is not guilt, but anger. So I wanted to share, if I have time. Do I have time? Mm-hmm. With you some of the projects that, based on my own, so that my advice here is based on my own experience of, you know, trying to find health in all these different kinds of diets until I finally discovered that I could find some health and some solutions and some value in my own tradition. So I created a project to do research on my own cultural traditions, and that's my current project, Comidas que Cura. I've interviewed my family members, grandmother, parents, and I've teamed up with other people that are doing the same, and we've taken this to different parts of Ecuador, and finding out what are people, the people that we can relate to right now were eating when they were children before this very rapid transition changed the way they eat and the way they live, right? This is my, if you want to get involved at all with our project, you can log on to our website. And we're always looking for volunteers, and if you have students that would like to intern with us or volunteer with us, we're very happy to get get that help. And I also started a documentary project to tell the story about coconut gentrification, because I think the main problem, like I explained, is that misinformation that prevails locally. And the best way to tackle that is informing people, because no matter how expensive coconuts are, if people are not, if people don't have the knowledge, and the knowledge is already in their community. So this documentary is not only about what the science says, but also what kind of value people can find in their own traditions. So you can.
coconut has become a trendy superfood. Many alternative diets encourage people to eat more coconut, especially coconut fat. But people in tropical lands are finding it hard to access this local and traditional food. In Ecuador, coconuts grow in the coastal province of Esmeraldas, where people have used it to make traditional dishes for centuries. Esmeraldans used to eat coconuts several times a day with their meals. However, today they can only afford to eat coconut dishes a few times a week, and they no longer produce coconut oil, which was a traditional remedy.
Porque el coco se puso demasiado caro. Un coco vale 2 euros. Y de un coco dura apenas sale una onza de aceite de coco. Tengo que rayar yo 20 cocos por lo menos para sacar un litro. Y sale caro.
People of Esmeraldas also avoid eating coconut in the belief that it's unhealthy. Ecuadorian health authorities have launched campaigns against coconut because they believe its saturated fat is associated with heart disease and weight gain. But these medical recommendations are outdated. Recent scientific findings debunked anti-fat beliefs and verified the health benefits of traditional fats like coconut oil. Having the people of Esmeraldas turn away from and even feel guilty about eating locally grown traditional foods like coconut in favor of processed foods goes against their right to access a locally grown food and assert their food sovereignty. We want to change this by making a short film in Spanish about the health benefits of coconut. Our documentary will place the latest scientific findings about coconut and health in perspective with the history of the traditional uses of coconut. With your support, we can make a film to help the people of Esmeraldas empower their own communities by learning about the history and the latest scientific findings that validate the healing power of their own traditions. To all of you, health-conscious coconut lovers, your support for this project is an opportunity to show that you care about the health of the people that live in the places where your food is grown. I hope you will think about supporting health and community empowerment in Ecuador through a film about coconut health science and food traditions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your wonderful speech. Now we have 10 minutes for some question and answer, just some guidelines. Please state your name and whether you have any sort of affiliation with the university, and make sure your question is respectful and ends in a question mark. So, are there any starters?
Hi, my name is Alex Leon. I'm a second-year law student here. I really appreciate your presentation, and thank you very much for being here. I was wondering if you could give us any concrete advice as to what we can do in the supermarket to make choices that would not promote gentrification.
Well, like I said, I can tell you, for example, from my experience in my own food co-op, I know that if you go there and ask for a specific, so for example, this is how it goes. Dr. Oz comes out and says that red palm oil is a superfood and has all of these superpowers. And then consumer goes to the store and asks for red palm oil. So the store brings the red palm oil to you, right? So this is the way in which you buy into the media and the industry. You have a power to create this market, right? And like I said, this is it could benefit some people and it could harm other people, but a lot of people, very few people are making a lot of profit, right? So, it's just the way the system works. So the best thing that you can do is eat local and support your local food system. And not feel guilty about what you're eating, because guilt is the least healthy, way that you can eat. Guilty for anything. If you're feeling guilty about, that's the whole point. It's not. You're not gonna change anything by feeling guilty, right? You're changing by taking action, not by feeling guilty. And feeling guilty is bad for you. Yeah.
I think you mentioned something like thousands of studies on saturated fats. And just maybe you could comment on the My Plate, My Planet. This is a Washington Post full-page ad, and there's a lot of the organizations we're familiar with who have signed on to this. So what you're saying and the research you're saying, it's kind of like they don't know that exists, that saturated fats have this positive side. So are you familiar with the way, what people usually say here in the United States about saturated fats?
Well,
and do you have a comment on that?
Yes, I just know that the guidelines they were changed like last week or 2 weeks ago, and there was some comment about saturated fat in the positive direction. But I think for the most part, the alternative health diet and community and are the ones that have embraced and promoted this idea that saturated fat is not unhealthy and that we should eat it, and have taken it to the extreme of creating high-fat diets, right? And I don't think that's the way to go either. But I think slowly it would become more mainstream in the sense of official guidelines.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. My name's Ona Balkas. I'm an attorney in the Food Law and Policy Clinic here at the law school. And thinking about policy ramifications, I was wondering what governments can be doing and what policymakers can be doing. My first thought was thinking about the U.S. government and labeling, this isn't a government policy, but labeling initiatives like fair trade. And I was curious to hear your thoughts on fair trade. On one hand, feels to me like it addresses the problems of at least giving a fair wage, but you're not solving the export issues that you were talking about. So I guess this is 3 questions, I'm sorry. Fair trade, what you think U.S. government can do, and then also there must be a role for like the government of Ecuador, the government of Bolivia, to be protecting their citizens from these public health consequences, and also from exporting their traditional foods.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, regarding fair trade, I think from the perspective of consumers, it's a very easy solution to just ditch to fair trade, and then you wash your guilt and you're done. But I think I'm sure there's people here that specialize on the whole the whole process of acquiring fair trade certification, and whether that is is in anywhere making trade fairer or not. But I think like I said, from the consumer's perspective, eating local is the best way to go. And labeling just creates it's a form of advertising. So it really doesn't change things. It may change. It may make product more attractive for health conscious people that are not wanting to feel guilty because media and industry is telling us to feel guilty. So by buying fair trade, I'm not going to feel guilty. I don't know on the other end what happens, but and going to your other question about U.S. government, change the food system. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, there's many arguments why the food system is problematic and it needs to be changed on that end. And on the other end of governments in Latin America, I think definitely there should be a more sovereign and grassroots kind of perspective that is informing policy rather than always turning to international guidelines and studies that are made abroad. Part of the problem is that very little or no research is conducted in the countries, right? So they always rely on research that is done abroad because this is where the research takes place and where the resources are. And supporting, a research done in the country, and there's some interesting perspectives. For example, if you look at the government of Ecuador, all the investment in research that the government is putting on conducting research and promoting a more sovereign, again, a more a policy that looks at the local resources and from there parts to do or to design a food policy.
I have a question about this. If the capacity of a region to produce, say, coconuts or quinoa exceeds the market within that community or within that region, doesn't it make more sense to seek external markets and to export indigenous products than to, say, manufacture T-shirts for export? In other words, if, say, Spain and Greece produce more olives than the Spaniards and the Greeks can consume, doesn't it make sense for them to have an export market in olives than for them to get into manufacturing exports of things that could easily be produced in the other countries?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but again, this story is a story about raw natural resources and international trade of raw natural resources. For example, oil in Ecuador, right? We've been dependent on oil exports for our entire Republican life, and this makes you vulnerable to price fluctuations in the international market. So that is part of the problem on relying on natural resources as export commodities. And also, if we've seen in Ecuador and Bolivia, there's already an industry that adds value to raw materials and natural, like quinoa, for example. But so in the case of oil, it's the history of Ecuador. We export oil, but we have to import gasoline because we don't have a refining. So that's another issue. We need to, we need the resources. We need the technology. We need the education to be able to produce, to manufacture and to add more value and to produce manufacturer products instead of importing them. So that's the other issue with that.
Thank you everyone for coming once again, and thank you, Pilar. Another round of applause.